Did you know that more than 90% of viewers don't subscribe to our channel? If you're watching this and haven't subscribed yet, please consider hitting that subscribe button. We don't run ads on our videos, so we don't earn anything from them. Every subscription, every like, every comment truly means the world to us. Your support keeps our passion alive and motivates us to create more. We'd also love to hear from you. Tell us where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Let's start our story.
Story number 1. A sealed trailer, a straightforward route, a delivery window generous enough to allow for one long fuel stop, and a slow, careful pace through the mountain corridor. The dispatch notes were clean. The weather report was ordinary, the kind of job that didn't leave much room for imagination. But imagination had never needed room. It had always slipped in through the cracks. Mara Lyle had been driving long enough to recognize the particular stillness that arrived around midnight. Not the quiet of peace, exactly. More like the quiet of a house after everyone has gone to bed, when the walls keep their own counsel and the floorboards remember footsteps that aren't happening now. Her rig moved with that heavy, reliable confidence that only comes from weight and momentum. The diesel engine's low note stayed steady, a patient animal breathing beneath metal. The cabin glowed in the soft green of the dash, lighting her hands as they rested on the wheel at 10 and 2, then drifted down to something looser as the road straightened. Her thermos sat in the cup holder, its lid scuffed, smelling faintly of cinnamon from a tea she'd poured hours ago. Outside, the highway was a two-lane thread through black countryside. Pines stood in rows like a quiet audience. The sky was moonless, but not starless. Thin points of white peered through a haze that made them look farther away than they should have been. And then, without warning, the fog arrived. It didn't roll in gently from the ditches the way fog sometimes does, creeping like spilled milk. It dropped. One moment the road ahead was open and honest. The next it was a gray wall, as if the world had been erased beyond her headlights. Mara eased off the accelerator. The tires hissed softly over the dampened pavement. The beams of her lights struck the fog and scattered into a pale, floating brightness, turning the air itself into something solid. She flicked her wipers on instinct. They squeaked once across a windshield that wasn't wet, then settled into a slow rhythm anyway. The sound was comforting, like a metronome for a song she knew by heart. The radio was quiet, no late-night talk, no stations coming through clearly, just the faint, oceanic shush of static. She reached for the CB mic, thumbed it once and let go. No need to stir the air unless she had to. The fog made the highway feel narrower than it was. Shoulder lines seemed to drift. The reflective paint of the lane markers flashed in and out, appearing late, too close, then vanishing under the truck with a soft, hypnotic cadence. Mara kept her eyes moving. Left mirror, right mirror, road, gauges. That steady discipline of someone who had learned not to trust fatigue. She noticed details without chasing them. An empty pull-off swallowed by gray, a leaning mile marker, a small road sign that announced a creek name she didn't recognize. Then she saw lights ahead. Not headlights. Stationary lights, warm and amber, hovering low, like sodium lamps over a parking lot. Her first thought was relief. A way station, maybe, or a small truck stop tucked off the highway. She hadn't planned a break yet, but fog changed the rules. Fog always did. It made the body tense in ways a driver didn't notice until shoulders started to ache. The lights grew brighter, resolving into a row of fixtures over a wide apron of pavement. A sign emerged through the mist, illuminated from within. Way station open. Mara frowned. There hadn't been a way station on this stretch, not according to her route notes. But route notes weren't scripture. States changed things. Temporary stations popped up. Mobile units set up in places that made no sense until someone with a badge decided they did. A second sign closer, flashed in pale orange LEDs. All commercial vehicles must enter. It wasn't the kind of message a driver ignored lightly. Mara checked her mirrors, signaled, and eased into the deceleration lane. The fog pressed close as she left the highway, as if the ramp were a door closing behind her. The pavement here was smoother, almost too clean. Her headlights slid over painted arrows that looked newly bright, the white lines crisp and uncracked. The way station's building appeared on the right, low, rectangular, windows dark except for one lit room that glowed the color of butter. A flagpole stood beside it, the flag hanging limp in the damp air. No wind, no sound beyond the engine's idle and the soft ticking of cooling metal. Mara guided the truck onto the scale, a heavy metal plate embedded in the ground, ridged and dull. As her wheels climbed it, there was the familiar subtle change in vibration, like rolling onto a bridge. A red light glowed at the far end. "Stop." She stopped. The cab felt suddenly very small. The fog hid the edges of the lot. Beyond the lights there was nothing. No other trucks, no line, no movement. Even the building seemed to be holding its breath. Mara leaned forward, peering through the windshield. The scale house window, directly ahead, was lit from within. She expected to see a face, a silhouette, someone moving paperwork. Instead, the window looked empty. Then, as if the fog had decided to allow it, a figure appeared in the doorway of the building to the right. A person in a reflective vest stepped out and stood under a lamp. The reflective strips caught the light in bright bands. The figure raised one hand, not a wave exactly, more like a simple gesture, "Stay." Mara's fingers tightened slightly on the wheel. She watched the person's posture, calm, unhurried, not threatening, just precise. The CB crackled. A voice came through, thin with static as though traveling a long distance. "Unit on the scale," it said. "Hold." Mara didn't respond. She hadn't given her handle. They hadn't asked. The voice sounded neither male nor female in any definitive way, softened by the radio's distortion. It might have been anyone. The red light stayed on. Seconds stretched, thick as the fog. Mara felt the quiet gathering. She became aware of the faint smell of pine sap seeping through the vents, mixed with diesel and the warm plastic scent of the dashboard. Her phone, mounted on the dash, showed no signal. The figure in the vest didn't move, not even a shift of weight, just stood in the same place as if carved there. Then with a small click, the red light switched to green. "Go." Mara released the brake and rolled forward, off the scale and into a marked lane where a second sign instructed. "Pull forward 2 window." She pulled up beside the lit room. The window was open now, and warm air spilled out, smelling like coffee and paper. An attendant sat inside. Not the figure in the vest. This was someone else older, with a cap pulled low and a badge clipped to a lanyard. The badge caught the light, but the name on it was obscured by glare. The attendant didn't smile, didn't frown either. Their expression was neutral in a way that made it hard to place their age, their mood, even their attention. "License and logs," the attendant said. Mara handed over what was needed. Her movements were routine, practiced. She watched the attendant's hands, steady, clean, nails trimmed short. The attendant flipped through documents with unhurried confidence, as if time wasn't something to be saved. Outside, the figure in the vest still stood under the lamp, still perfectly still. Mara tried not to stare, but the stillness tugged at her in the way a crooked picture frame does, quietly insistent, begging to be fixed. The attendant placed her documents on a metal clipboard, wrote something, then paused. "Trailer seal number," they said without looking up. Mara answered. The attendant wrote it down, then slid a small receipt across the counter. The paper was thick and slightly warm, as if it had just been printed. Mara glanced at it. It listed the station name at the top. Old Turner Scale. Beneath that was a time stamp. 0013. And beneath that, a weight reading. It was wrong. Not a little wrong, wildly wrong. As if the trailer behind her held something impossibly heavy. The kind of number that belonged to an entire train car, not a single rig. Mara's throat tightened. "There's no way," she began. The attendant looked up then. Their eyes were pale, almost colorless in the fluorescent light. Not eerie in a supernatural way, just unusual, like a photograph that has been overexposed. "Roll," the attendant said, voice mild. "You're clear." Mara kept her hand on the receipt. The paper felt oddly smooth. The ink looked too dark, too sharp. She could see clearly a faint watermark pressed into it. A circle with a simple compass rose. "Your weight," Mara tried again, but the attendant's gaze drifted past her, toward the lane, as if they were already moving on to the next truck in a line that didn't exist. Mara swallowed the rest of her sentence. She put the truck in gear and pulled forward. The exit lane curved back toward the highway. A final sign stood at the merge point, lit from within. "Drive safe. Keep it between the lines." It was a phrase that sounded like an old joke, something someone might say with a grin. But there was no grin here, only fog and amber light. Mara merged carefully. The highway received her again, swallowing the way station behind her in a few seconds of gray. The lights vanished as if someone had flipped a switch. She drove on, heartbeat louder than usual in the soft cocoon of the cab. The fog stayed. It thickened, then thinned, then thickened again, playing with her sense of distance. Occasionally her headlights caught reflective eyes in the brush deer, most likely still as ornaments. She tried to reason it out. Wrong scale calibration, clerical error, a bad printout. But the station name nagged at her. Old Turner Scale. It sounded like a place that had existed for a long time, the kind of facility that got passed down in stories rather than updated on apps. After 20 minutes, the fog loosened its grip. The world beyond the windshield expanded again. The lane markers regained their honest rhythm. A few stars reappeared. And with distance came a small embarrassment. The body always did that after fear, made it feel silly, like being startled by a coat on a chair. Mara glanced at the receipt again, intending to tuck it away. The ink had changed. The weight reading was still there, but beneath it, in smaller type, a line had appeared that she would have sworn hadn't been there before. Cargo Echo. Mara stared at the word until it stopped looking like a word. Echo. The cab seemed to respond to it. Her own breathing sounded louder. The hum of the engine felt closer, almost inside her head. Even the faint rattle of something in the glove compartment, an old pen, a spare charging cable, became distinct, as if the truck had decided to reveal every sound it contained. She folded the receipt and placed it in the console. She told herself it was a prank, a misprint, a trick of light. But her fingers lingered on the paper a moment too long, as if expecting it to be warm again. A mile later, her CB crackled. Not a clear call, not a handle, just a soft burst of static that resolved into a voice for half a second. "Keep it between the lines," it said. Then nothing. Mara's skin prickled along her arms. She didn't reach for the mic. She didn't respond. She kept the truck steady and let the road unfurl. She passed a sign that announced the next town small, forgettable. A cluster of lights in the distance suggested a gas station. The fog had mostly lifted, leaving the air damp and cool. She took the exit and rolled into the station's lot. The place was open, bright, ordinary in the way of late-night convenience stores. A couple of cars sat near the pumps. A tired-looking clerk moved behind the counter inside. Mara parked in the truck lane, set the brake, and stepped down from the cab. The outside air smelled of wet asphalt and gasoline, a familiar, almost comforting combination. The hum of the station's lights buzzed faintly overhead. Somewhere, a compressor kicked on with a low groan. As she walked toward the store, she noticed a bulletin board near the entrance covered with flyers. Lost cats, yard sales, local events. The paper edges fluttered slightly in the breeze from the opening door. One flyer caught her eye, not because it was loud, but because it was plain. Black and white photocopy. Old Turner scale, closed since 1996. Do not attempt to enter during fog conditions. Local ROADS department notice. Mara stopped so abruptly that the automatic door half opened, then shut again with a soft sigh. She leaned closer. The notice looked official enough, though the formatting was old-fashioned. The words fog conditions were underlined twice, hard enough to dent the paper. Below the notice was a small photo, a way station building, low and rectangular, a flagpole beside it. The same shape she'd seen, but the photo showed it surrounded by weeds, windows broken, a chain across the entrance. Someone had written in pen at the bottom, "It calls you in." Mara felt a slow, strange chill, not sharp but spreading, like cold tea seeping into warm water. She looked back toward the highway. From here, she could see the on-ramp and the dark line of trees beyond it. The fog, out there, seemed to be gathering again in the low places, waiting. Inside the store, the clerk glanced up, nodded, and went back to their magazine. A small TV above the counter played a muted weather channel, the screen full of maps and scrolling text. Mara bought a coffee she didn't really want. The cup was too hot in her hand. The lid squeaked when she pressed it. When she returned to her truck, she climbed into the cab and sat for a moment without starting the engine. The cabin was exactly as she'd left it, the faint scent of cinnamon tea in the thermos. The glow of the dash, the receipt tucked in the console. She pulled it out again, unfolding it carefully. The station name was still there. Old Turner scale. The weight reading still impossible. Cargo Echo. But now, beneath that, there was another line lighter, as if printed in a hurry. Driver, Maralyle. Her name. She hadn't given it at the window, not verbally, not on any document the attendant had touched as far as she could recall. Her license, yes, but the attendant hadn't looked at her the way someone looks when they confirm identity. It had felt like they already knew, like the paperwork was a formality performed for the benefit of the ritual. Mara stared at her name until the letters seemed to float slightly above the page. Outside, a car door slammed. Someone laughed briefly, a normal human sound. The world hadn't ended. The night hadn't changed. Yet the paper in her hand felt like proof of something that didn't belong in the same reality as fluorescent lights and coffee cups. She folded the receipt again and placed it in the glove compartment this time, behind a manual and a packet of napkins. Then she shut it with more force than necessary. She started the engine. The familiar rumble returned, grounding her. The gauges settled into their usual positions. The cabin warmed. Back on the highway, the fog returned in patches, but Mara kept her speed steady and her attention sharper than before. She stayed between the lines as if the phrase were a commandment. The rest of the run passed without incident. Dawn never had to be mentioned for the night to feel long. It simply did. The miles slipped by in a quiet procession. Her delivery went smoothly. The receiver signed, the dock lights blinked, the trailer door seals were checked and approved. Hours later, in a brighter lot with other rigs parked nearby, Mara sat in her cab with the engine off, listening to the faint ticks of cooling metal. The air was still, ordinary. She told herself she would throw the receipt away. She would stop giving it power. But when she opened the glove compartment, the paper wasn't where she'd put it. It lay on the passenger seat instead, neatly folded, as if someone had placed it there with care. Mara didn't unfold it this time. She simply looked at it for a long moment, then reached over and slipped it into a notebook she kept for mileage and expenses, between pages that already held the mundane evidence of her life. Fuel totals, toll receipts, scribbled reminders. She closed the notebook gently, as if tucking something in to sleep. Outside the cab, another truck started up, its engine deep and reassuring. A driver walked by carrying a bag of snacks. Somewhere, a door thumped shut. Life went on around her. And yet, in the quiet spaces between sounds, Mara couldn't shake the feeling that the road had gained a new feature, something not marked on any map. A place that could appear whenever the fog decided the world needed narrowing again. A place that weighed more than cargo. A place that measured what followed a driver home. In the stillness, as she rested her hands on the steering wheel, she thought she heard it. So faint it could have been imagination, so soft it could have been the settling of air in the cab. A small electronic chirp, like a scale acknowledging weight, like a machine far away in the fog still counting. Story number 2. On the long desert routes, drivers learned to respect emptiness the way sailors respected open water. Not because emptiness was dangerous on its own, but because it made the mind louder. A single thought could echo for miles. A faint sound could feel like a message. A small light far away could become a destination before it had earned the right to exist. Sienna Hart's rig carried a refrigerated load that breathed in quiet cycles behind her, soft fan noise, a periodic shiver through the frame, the steady work of keeping cold where cold belonged. Inside the cab, the world was organized. Dash lights dimmed to a comfortable glow, a paper atlas tucked under the passenger seat, a small charm hanging from the mirror that clicked gently whenever the road's texture changed. The night had been clear when she started. Wide sky, hard stars, the kind of darkness that looked clean. Then, at an altitude change so subtle it barely registered, the fog began. It wasn't supposed to, not here, not like this. At first it clung to the low ground, tucked into washes and shallow dips like a secret the land was holding. But as Sienna rolled onward, it rose to meet her, thinning the horizon until the desert stopped being a place and became a blank page. The fog had a scent, too, cool and mineral, as if the air had been poured over stone. The beams of her headlights didn't cut through so much as they painted a short tunnel of pale light, and everything beyond that tunnel felt undecided. She reduced speed. The tires made a gentle, wet hiss over asphalt that hadn't been wet a minute earlier. The center line appeared and vanished in rhythmic flashes, a hypnotic guide. The radio couldn't find anything stable. A song would surface for a few seconds, then dissolve into static. The weather band clicked and chattered without saying much at all. Even the engine note seemed softened, like the fog was muffling sound as well as sight. Sienna kept her posture loose but attentive, hands steady, eyes moving. The cab smelled faintly of peppermint gum and clean fabric, the familiar comforts of someone who lived between deliveries. Then her GPS did something small, and therefore unsettling. The route line remained. The distance to the next service area remained. But the tiny arrow that represented her truck drifted half an inch off the highway, floating parallel to it, traveling through a blank beige space where, according to the map, nothing existed. Sienna didn't panic. Maps were suggestions at the best of times. Satellites had their moods. Fog did strange things to signals. Still, she reached over and tapped the screen once, then again. The arrow corrected itself for a moment, then slid away like a magnet repelled. Outside, a reflective sign emerged from the fog, close enough that her headlights bleached it pale. Rest area 1 mile. The letters looked too crisp, too new. The sign's edges were sharp, unweathered, as if it had been installed yesterday. She hadn't planned a stop yet, but fog changed the shape of fatigue. It made the world feel closer to the windshield. It made the shoulders creep upward, the jaw set harder. 1 mile later, the rest area appeared. A warm pool of amber light spilled from tall lamps, forming a small island in the gray. The entrance ramp curved gently off the highway, and the painted arrows on the pavement looked freshly bright, as if they were still drying. Sienna signaled and eased in. The rest area was quiet. No other trucks, no cars, no silhouettes moving between spaces. Just the hum of lighting and, faintly, the whisper of wind moving through low shrubs beyond the pavement. She parked in a wide slot designed for rigs, set the brake, and let the engine idle down. The silence that followed felt heavy in a particular way. Not threatening, exactly. More like the moment after a conversation ends, when a room remembers what was said. Sienna climbed down from the cab. Her boots met the pavement with a soft, solid thump. The air was cool enough to make her cheeks tighten, and the fog beaded on her eyelashes in tiny, delicate points. The rest area building stood ahead, simple, rectangular, stone-faced in a way that tried to look timeless. A glowing sign above the entrance read, "Welcome TRAVLERS." No state logo, no highway number, just that, like a note left on a kitchen counter. She walked toward the doors. Her footsteps sounded louder than they should have, the fog swallowing everything else. As she approached, the automatic doors slid open with a smooth hush. Warm air wrapped around her, carrying the scent of lemon cleaner and something faintly sweet. Like vanilla from a long-closed candle, the interior lighting was soft, not harsh, more like a hotel corridor than a roadside facility. A row of vending machines stood against one wall. A map display stood against another. Benches, a water fountain, everything arranged neatly, almost carefully, as if someone had staged the room for a photograph. And yet it felt unoccupied in a way that didn't match its cleanliness. There were no discarded cups, no footprints, no scattered pamphlets. Even the brochure rack was full, each slot perfectly squared. Sienna's attention drifted to the map display. It was the old kind, a large printed map behind glass with a "You are here" arrow. The arrow pointed to a dot labeled Hards Pass. Sienna stopped. Her last name wasn't uncommon, but seeing it there gave her the same sensation as hearing someone say her name in a crowd. An instinctive turn of the head, a tightening behind the ribs. She looked closer. The dot sat on a thin line of highway that, according to her own atlas, didn't have a named pass anywhere near it. Behind her, an announcement chimed softly overhead, gentle, almost musical. "Welcome, travelers," a calm voice said. "Please rest, please restore." Sienna turned toward the ceiling speakers. The voice was genderless in that practiced, public way. It didn't sound like a person speaking live. It sounded like a recording designed to soothe. But the cadence was strange, fractionally too slow, as if the pauses between words had been measured. She approached the vending machines, more out of curiosity than hunger. Their glass fronts reflected her in faint double images. The machines were lit, but the shelves inside were nearly empty. No snacks, no sodas, just clean spirals waiting for products that never arrived. Except for one item. A single packet of peppermint gum sat alone in the bottom row, front and center. The same brand she kept in her cab, the same green and white packaging. Sienna stared at it until the colors stopped looking like colors and started looking like a decision. She checked the coin slot, the card reader. Everything appeared functional. She inserted her card. The machine accepted it with a cheerful little beep, too cheerful in the quiet. The spiral turned. The packet dropped into the tray with a soft thud. When she opened the tray door, the gum was cold to the touch, as if it had been sitting in a refrigerator. The wrapper felt slightly damp, like it had been breathed on. Sienna didn't open it. She held it for a moment, then slipped it into her jacket pocket. The overhead announcement chimed again. "Welcome back, Sienna Hart," the voice said as calmly as before. "Please rest, please restore." For a second her mind tried to reject it. Names were on cards, cards were in machines. Machines were connected to networks, networks knew things. But the rest area had no branding, no signage, no visible staff, and her phone, when she checked it, still showed no signal. A door at the far end of the building opened with a quiet click. A maintenance worker stepped through, pushing a mop bucket that rolled without squeaking. The worker wore a plain uniform, gray shirt, gray pants, and a cap with no logo. The worker's face was unremarkable, gentle in the way of someone who didn't want attention. They moved with unhurried efficiency, as if the night belonged to them. Sienna watched, unable to help it. The worker didn't look up right away. They rolled the bucket to the center of the floor, then began mopping in smooth, overlapping strokes, water gliding over tile, leaving behind a sheen that reflected the lights like a thin layer of glass. Sienna cleared her throat, the sound too loud. "Excuse me," she said. The worker paused. Slowly they raised their head. Their eyes were mild, not blank, simply calm, as if nothing surprised them anymore. "Road's quiet tonight," the worker said. It wasn't an answer, but it wasn't wrong. Sienna nodded once, then gestured toward the map display. "This place, what pass is this?" The worker's expression didn't change. The mop rested against the floor, handle angled lightly in one hand. "Heart's Pass," they said, as if reading a label on a familiar shelf. "That's what it's called when someone needs it." Sienna felt her fingers tighten around the strap of her jacket. "When someone needs it." The worker resumed mopping, the water whispering. The overhead speakers chimed softly again, and the same voice drifted through the room. "Please remember, keep your headlights low in fog, keep your distance, keep your hands warm." The advice was sensible, comforting even. But it carried a private tone, like a reminder from someone who had watched Sienna drive. She looked toward the restroom hallway. The lights there were dimmer, warmer. A single potted plant sat at the corner, green, healthy, its leaves glossy with moisture. It seemed oddly vibrant in a building that felt like a display. She walked a few steps down the hall, then stopped. At the end, a framed photograph hung on the wall. It was black and white, grainy, a picture of a highway cutting through fog. In the foreground stood an older semi-truck, the kind with a rounded hood. Beside it, a driver posed with an arm resting on the open door. The driver's face was blurred by age and camera quality, but the posture was unmistakably familiar. One hip slightly angled, the relaxed stance of someone who had spent their life climbing in and out of cabs. In the bottom corner, handwritten in pale ink, were the words, "Heart's Pass, 1978. Sienna's breath slowed. Her father had driven in the late 70s. He had told stories of routes that vanished in storms, of rest areas that didn't appear in daylight, of strange kindnesses from strangers who never gave names. He had also once, when she was small and couldn't sleep, hummed a simple tune, 3 notes repeated, soft and steady, until her breathing matched it. Now faintly, almost buried beneath the building's quiet hum, that same 3-note pattern seemed to exist in the air. Not a song on the radio. Not music from a speaker. Just a rhythm, like the building itself was remembering a lullaby. Sienna turned back toward the main room. The maintenance worker had moved closer, still mopping, leaving the tiles shining. Their bucket rolled as if it knew exactly where to go. Sienna approached the counter near the entrance, an information desk with a guest book sitting open, a pen beside it. The guest book pages were thick, creamy paper. Names filled the lines in tidy handwriting, all dated with the same format. Sienna scanned a few entries. Some were ordinary, safe travels, made it through. Fog was heavy. Then, in the middle of the page, she saw a name she recognized from childhood stories, an uncle who had passed years ago. Under his name, written in the same ink, was a note. Rested here, heard the tune, kept going. Sienna's hands went colder. She flipped forward, more names, more notes, some recent, some old. And on a fresh line near the bottom of the page, still glossy as if just written, Sienna Heart 0000. The pen lay beside the book, capped. No ink smudges, no sign of anyone having touched it. Sienna stared at her own name until the letters seemed to press upward from the page. Behind her, the automatic doors sighed open. A gust of fog slipped inside, thin, cold, curling around her ankles like a cat weaving past. Outside, the amber light still glowed. The parking lot still looked empty. And yet somewhere beyond the fog's edge, an engine idled deep and distant. Not her engine. Another one far enough away to be muffled, close enough to be real. Sienna stepped toward the doors and looked out. In the far corner of the lot, barely visible through the gray, sat a second truck. Old-fashioned silhouette, rounded hood, headlights dimmed low as if being polite. A cab light glowed softly inside it, warm as lamplight in a window. Sienna couldn't see the driver. She couldn't even be sure there was one. But the truck felt like a presence, patient, waiting without urgency. The maintenance worker's voice came from behind her, gentle as the mop's whisper. Sometimes the fog sets up a room, they said. Sometimes the road forgets where it put you. This place helps the road remember. Sienna didn't turn around. Her eyes remained on the old truck. "What does it want?" she asked quietly. The worker paused, and in that pause the building seemed to hold its breath with them. "Nothing," they said at last. "That's the comfort of it. It doesn't want, it just keeps." Sienna felt the packet of peppermint gum in her pocket, cold against her fingers. A small, absurd anchor. She backed away from the doorway and returned to her truck outside. Steps measured, mind carefully blank the way drivers learn to make it when something couldn't be processed safely at speed. In her cab, she started the engine. The familiar rumble steadied her. She adjusted her mirrors. The fog was thicker now, turning the rest area's lights into floating halos. The old truck in the corner was harder to see, reduced to a suggestion. Sienna signaled and rolled toward the exit ramp, merging back onto the highway as gently as if she were leaving a sleeping house. Once on the road, she kept her speed low and her headlights dipped. The center line guided her again, flashing and disappearing beneath her bumper in a calm rhythm. A mile passed. Then another. The fog thinned slightly, and a sign emerged ahead in her beams. Rest area 1 mile. Sienna's stomach tightened, not in panic, but in recognition, like seeing the same dream twice. She passed the sign. She kept going. 1 mile later, amber lights bloomed in the fog to her right. The same island of warmth, the same entrance ramp, the same inviting glow. Sienna did not take it. She kept both hands steady on the wheel and focused on the center line. The advice from the speaker returned to her, but she made it her own. Keep your distance, keep your hands warm. She rolled her shoulders once, loosened her grip, and quietly, so quietly it could have been nothing, she hummed 3 simple notes. In the cab, the sound was small, private, human. The fog ahead seemed to hesitate. Not part like curtains, not lift like weather, just hesitate as if listening. Sienna continued humming, steady as a heartbeat. The truck's engine matched the rhythm. The tires whispered along. And gradually, the amber glow behind her faded into the gray, losing definition until it was no more than a memory of warmth. The GPS arrow slid back onto the highway line. It held there. The road resumed its honest shape. The fog remained, but it stopped behaving like a hallway with doors. Hours later, when the sky had brightened to a washed-out silver and the desert looked like itself again, Sienna stopped at a normal, clearly marked service plaza with plenty of cars and sunlit signage. Inside, she bought a bottle of water and a snack. The cashier didn't know her name. The receipt printed the correct time. Her phone found signal immediately, filling with mundane notifications. In the daylight, the night's rest area felt like something her mind had stitched together from fatigue and fog. And yet when she reached into her pocket, she still had the peppermint gum, cold, damp, unopened. At the bottom of the wrapper, printed in tiny text she hadn't noticed before, were words so faint they almost vanished against the design. "Hearts pass, please rest, please restore." Sienna slipped it into the glove compartment, not as proof, but as a reminder that sometimes the road could set up a room in the fog. Not to trap a driver, just to keep them for a moment, when keeping was kinder than letting them disappear into the gray. Story number 3. The coastal highway had a reputation among night drivers, beautiful in daylight, deceptively intimate after dark. It ran close enough to the sea that the air carried salt even with the windows up. It curved and climbed and dipped in ways that made the rig feel like it was following an older path, something laid down before anyone thought to straighten the land. On clear nights, the water could be seen as a wide, breathing shadow to the left. On foggy ones, the ocean vanished entirely, leaving only the idea of it, an unseen presence that the windshield could not confirm. Caleb took the route because it was familiar. Familiar routes were a kind of kindness. They let the body relax into muscle memory. The gentle correction of the wheel through the long bend near the cliffs, the slight brake tap before the downhill grade, the way the truck's weight settled when the road leveled out again. The load was unremarkable, boxed paper goods, strapped and squared, the kind of cargo that never shifted if the driver treated it with respect. The cab was clean in a lived-in way, an old jacket folded behind the seat, a couple of receipts tucked into the visor, a faint scent of pine air freshener that had long ago stopped pretending to be pine. The night began with clarity. The sky held a scattering of stars, and the line where sea met sky was barely visible, a darker band against darker blue. Caleb kept the radio low, not for the music but for the company of sound. The tires sang their steady note on the pavement. The engine's hum was warm and reliable, a constant that made time feel manageable. Then, around mile marker 217, the fog arrived. It didn't roll in like weather so much as it settled like a decision. The first wisps appeared along the guardrail, pale fingers curling up from the drop-off toward the sea. Then the headlights caught more of it, and the beams turned milky at the edges, and the world ahead shortened to a small, floating corridor. Caleb eased down to a careful speed. The cabin seemed to grow quieter as the fog thickened, as if sound had been wrapped in cloth. Even the ocean, usually audible here, a low hush beyond the guardrail, was gone, replaced by a silence that felt too complete. A reflective sign surfaced in the headlight glow. Fog zone, use low beams. He switched to low beams and watched the light change, the fog becoming less of a wall and more of a moving veil. The road was still there, lane lines flashing by with their familiar rhythm, but distance was no longer trustworthy. Objects appeared late. Shapes took longer to resolve. Caleb's shoulders crept upward. He let them fall again consciously. He kept his eyes scanning, the white line to the right, the center line to the left, mirrors catching only gray and the faint red of his trailer's side markers. A set of taillights appeared ahead. 2 red dots steady and level at the exact height of a passenger car. They were not bright, not braking, just present, floating in the fog like a pair of coals. Relief came first. Another vehicle meant the road was still behaving like a road. Another driver meant the night wasn't his alone. Caleb maintained distance, matching their pace. The taillights stayed ahead, never getting closer, never pulling away. He could make out the faint suggestion of a vehicle shape around them. Maybe a sedan, maybe something smaller, but the fog refused to give details. A mile passed in careful quiet, then another. Caleb noticed something subtle. The taillights ahead did not sway with the curves the way they should have. The coastal road here arced gently left, then right, following the contours of the cliffs. A vehicle ahead would normally shift within the lane, its lights tracing the curve like a pen line. But these lights stayed almost perfectly centered, as if pinned to the fog itself. Caleb frowned, not frightened so much as puzzled. Fatigue played tricks and fog played its own. He checked his dash clock. The digits glowed soft green. 0217. He glanced back to the windshield. Mile marker 217 appeared on the right shoulder, reflective numbers flashing in his beams. 217. Caleb's brow furrowed. The last marker had been 217 a few minutes ago. He remembered because the fog had arrived around it. He watched the taillights ahead, then checked his speed. Still steady. No sudden changes, no turnoffs taken, just forward motion. He drove on, expecting the next marker. In the fog, the road felt like a tunnel. The guardrail to the left rose and fell in pale segments. The right shoulder line kept him honest. The taillights stayed ahead, calm as a metronome. Then another reflective post emerged. 217. The same number, the same font, the same scuffed edge on the sign's metal backing, as if it were the same physical object being passed again. Caleb's hands tightened on the wheel, not enough to jerk the truck, just enough to feel it. The radio, which had been playing a soft, forgettable song, crackled. For a moment there was only static, like wind through dry grass. Then a voice came through, clearer than it should have been, given the area's spotty reception. "And if you're just joining us," the host said in a low, late-night cadence, "this one goes out to the drivers riding the fog. Keep it steady. Keep it kind." The song that followed wasn't one Caleb recognized. It sounded old, recorded with a warmth that made the instruments feel close. A lullaby rhythm, gentle and repetitive. Something about it tugged at a place behind Caleb's ribs, a familiarity he couldn't name. He turned the volume down, then up again. The signal was clean, too clean. The taillights ahead remained unchanged. The fog remained thick. Mile marker 217 appeared again. Caleb didn't say anything. There was no one to speak to, and the act of nomming it felt like it would make it more real. Instead, he did what drivers did when the world became uncertain. He looked for patterns. He checked his trip mileage. It had increased. He checked fuel. Normal. Engine temp. Normal. Everything in the cab insisted on forward progress. Outside, the road insisted on repetition. 217. Caleb's throat went dry. He reached for his water bottle, took a sip. The water tasted faintly of plastic and something mineral, like the air outside had slipped in and changed it. Ahead, the taillights blinked once, left signal. They drifted toward the right side of the lane, as if preparing to take an exit. Caleb's heart gave a small, hopeful lurch. An exit meant a change, a different set of signs, a chance to anchor himself to something that wasn't repeating. The sedan, if it was a sedan, turned off onto a narrow ramp that appeared suddenly to the right, the reflective paint bright and fresh. Caleb saw a sign at the ramp's mouth as it slid into view. Scenic turnout 14 mile. The idea of a turnout in this fog was absurd, but so was passing the same mile marker 4 times. Caleb signaled and followed, keeping his speed low as the truck eased onto the ramp. The pavement changed texture, slightly rougher, a different aggregate, sending a new vibration up through the steering column. The fog seemed denser here, the light from his low beams flattening against it. The turnout widened into a small lot carved into the cliffside. A few parking spaces, a wooden fence beyond them, barely visible, guarding a drop into the unseen. The sedan's taillights were there, near the fence. Caleb pulled into a space meant for larger vehicles, aligning the truck carefully. He set the brake. The engine idled, then he shut it off. The silence was immediate and deep. Without the engine, the cab felt too still, as if it were holding its breath. Outside, the fog moved slowly, almost thoughtfully, curling around the lamps that lined the lot. The lamps gave off a soft amber glow, making the fog look like old paper. Caleb climbed down. His boots hit the ground with a solid thump that sounded louder than it should have. The air tasted of salt and wet wood. He looked toward the fence. The sedan was gone. No door closing, no reverse lights, no tire crunch on gravel, just absence as if the car had never been there at all. Caleb scanned the lot. It was empty, no other vehicles, no scattered trash, no sign of anyone lingering. He walked a few steps toward the fence. The wood was damp, the top rail slick under his fingers. Beyond it was only fog. The sea might have been 10 feet below or 100. There was no sound of waves. The lot's single information board stood nearby, a glass-fronted display with a map and a couple of posted notices. Caleb approached, squinting. The map showed the coastal route, the curves, the turnouts, the mile markers. In the corner was a bold arrow labeled "You are here." It pointed to a spot on the map near mile marker 217. Caleb's jaw tightened. He leaned closer, searching for some confirmation that he'd misunderstood. A small posted notice beneath the map drew his eye. It was printed on thick paper, edges curled from moisture. The letters were crisp. Please note, in dense fog, this turnout may appear more than once. Do not panic. Return to the highway and keep a steady speed. Caleb stared at the words until they felt less like advice and more like someone anticipating him. There was another line beneath, handwritten in neat block letters. Follow the TALLIGHTS only if they blink. He looked back toward the highway entrance. The ramp leading out was visible only as a pale strip. The fog beyond it glowed faintly with the highway's reflectors. Caleb's mouth was dry again. He swallowed. The air was cold enough to make his fingertips ache. He flexed his hands, then returned to the truck, climbing into the cab and closing the door with a careful, deliberate click. Inside, the cab smelled familiar, fabric, faint pine, a trace of coffee, comforts that insisted the world was ordinary. Caleb sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel, grounding himself in the physical reality of it. Leather texture under his palms, the slight give of the steering column. The weight of his own breath. He started the engine. The rumble returned, warm and steady, like a hand on the shoulder. He eased out of the turnout and back onto the highway. Fog swallowed the turnout almost immediately, hiding the amber lamps as if they were being dimmed behind frosted glass. Caleb kept his speed steady, exactly as the notice had said. He kept his hands warm by turning the heater up a notch, letting the vents breathe gentle heat over his knuckles. The radio crackled again. A different song began, still soft, still old-sounding, but now the melody was unmistakable to Caleb, plucking a memory he hadn't touched in years. It was a tune his mother used to hum while washing dishes, the notes repeating in a small circle. A song that belonged to kitchens and warm light, not cliffside fog. The host's voice returned between tracks, low and reassuring. Keep it steady, it said. You're doing fine. Caleb's eyes flicked to the station display. The frequency numbers were blank, as if the radio had forgotten where it was tuning. Ahead, the taillights reappeared. 2 red dots, calm as ever, suspended at that same perfect distance. Caleb's heart thudded once, hard enough to be felt in his throat. The notice echoed in his mind. Follow the TALLIGHTS only if they blink. The taillights did not blink. They simply existed. Caleb swallowed and did not accelerate. He did not chase. He held his speed and watched them with a careful detachment, like someone watching a distant lighthouse they knew not to steer directly toward. Mile marker 217 emerged again on the right shoulder. Caleb felt the repetition like a pressure against his temples. He kept his breathing even. He watched the road. He focused on the center line on the right shoulder. He let the taillights remain what they were, a suggestion of company, not a promise. The radio, almost kindly, lowered its own volume in his perception as his focus narrowed. The heater hummed. The engine kept time. Mile marker 217 passed again. Then something changed. On the left side of the road, The fog thinned for a brief moment, like a curtain pulled aside. Beyond the guardrail, the ocean appeared dark, vast, and breathing. A faint line of foam far below caught a smear of light and vanished. The sound of waves rose up, quiet but real, the most comforting noise Caleb had heard in an hour. The fog thickened again, but the ocean's presence lingered in his mind like a scent. He was near the water. He was moving forward. The world had not become a loop, it had become a test of attention. The taillights ahead flickered, just once. A tiny change, a brief blink that could have been a turn signal, or could have been fog bending the light. Caleb's fingers tightened reflexively. Then the taillights blinked again, clear this time, a right signal, deliberate. They drifted toward the shoulder, where a small exit ramp surfaced from the fog, marked by a reflective sign. Service road, authorized vehicles only. Caleb's first instinct was to ignore it. Service roads weren't for him. They led to maintenance yards and locked gates and dead ends. But the taillights continued blinking, patient, insistent. And the notice had said, only if they blink. Caleb's mind weighed two discomforts: staying in the repeating mile, or stepping onto an unauthorized road that had no reason to exist for him. His hand stayed steady, his speed stayed steady. At the last moment, he signaled and took the ramp. The service road was narrower, its edges less maintained. Reflective posts lined it at regular intervals, each one flashing in his headlights like a quiet nod. The fog here felt different, less uniform, more textured, as if it were clinging to trees and brush rather than floating free. A minute in, the road dipped sharply, and the air warmed by a degree or two, carrying the scent of wet earth and eucalyptus. The taillights ahead continued blinking until they reached a small, gravelly pull-off beside a closed gate. They stopped there. Caleb slowed and pulled up behind them. He expected, finally, to see the car. Instead, the taillights were simply there. Two red dots hovering at the exact height they'd always been, with no car body around them, no bumper, no silhouette. Just the lights, like eyes in the fog. They blinked off. The pull-off was empty. Caleb's breath caught, not in terror, but in a stunned, quiet disbelief that made the world feel slightly unreal. He stopped the truck anyway, because stopping felt safer than rolling forward blindly. He set the brake. The gate ahead was a standard service gate, chain-link metal posts, a padlock. A sign hung from it, reflective and plain. Road closed. Behind the gate, the service road continued for a short distance before curving out of sight into fog. Caleb sat in the cab, engine idling, and listened. No footsteps, no other engines, just the steady hum of his truck and the distant hush of waves, faint but present now, as if the service road had brought him closer to something true. On the right side of the gate was a small call box, the kind used at industrial entrances. A button, a speaker grill, a tiny camera lens. A green light on the box blinked slowly. Caleb stared at it. The green blink matched the rhythm of the songs the radio had been playing, a gentle pulse, an invitation pretending to be neutral. He did not want to press it, and yet his hand moved slowly, reluctantly, because the mind wanted an ending, even a strange one. He pressed the button. A soft tone sounded from the speaker, then a click. For a moment, there was only the quiet hiss of an open line. Then a voice spoke, low, calm, and familiar in a way that made Caleb's skin tighten. It was his own voice. Not exactly, not perfectly, but close enough that his body recognized it before his mind could argue. "Keep it steady," the voice said through the call box. "You're almost out." Caleb's fingers stayed on the button, numb. The voice continued, gentle as a night DJ. "Don't chase what won't come closer," it said. "Don't fight the fog, use what's real." Caleb swallowed. His own voice, his borrowed voice, felt like it was speaking from a place just behind his ribs, using the speaker as a mouth. "What's real?" he managed, his words barely louder than the engine. The call box clicked once, like a small sigh. "The ocean," the voice said. "The lines, the sound, count what you can count." The green light blinked. Caleb released the button. The line went dead. He sat very still. Outside, the fog drifted in slow layers. The gate remained locked. The service road remained closed. Yet Caleb felt with a clarity that surprised him that he was not trapped here. He was being given an exit that had nothing to do with roads and everything to do with attention. He put the truck in reverse and backed carefully, using mirrors and instinct, tires crunching softly over gravel. He turned the rig around in a slow, wide arc, the trailer following with obedient weight. Back on the service road, he drove as though he were carrying something fragile, his own calm. He returned to the highway and merged gently, low beams on, speed steady. The taillights did not reappear. Mile marker 217 appeared once more. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he didn't let the number take him. He breathed in through his nose and listened, really listened. The ocean was there faintly, a hush that rose and fell. The right shoulder line was there, white and steady. The center line flashed beneath the truck in a predictable cadence. He began counting reflectors. 1, 2, 3, 4. Each reflector was a small promise. The road is continuous, the road is marked, the road is measurable. Caleb kept counting. He let the numbers occupy his mind the way music had, the way fear had tried to. 30, 31, 32. The fog thinned, not abruptly, but in a gradual surrender. Shapes returned to the world, the dark mass of trees on the right, the pale suggestion of cliff and guardrail on the left. And then ahead, the reflective post that emerged did not read 217. It read 218. Caleb's shoulders dropped so suddenly it felt like something heavy had been set down inside him. His grip loosened on the wheel. His eyes stung, not with tears exactly, but with the body's delayed response to tension. The radio, as if satisfied, shifted to a different kind of static, then found a normal station, faint music, an ordinary commercial, a weather report that sounded bored. The fog still lingered, but it became weather again, not architecture. Caleb drove on, steady and quiet, letting the highway lengthen back into something honest. Later, at a well-lit gas station with fluorescent certainty and a coffee pot that smelled like burnt comfort, he stood outside his truck and watched other vehicles come and go. Their headlights swept across the lot. Their doors opened and shut. Voices drifted on the air, normal fragments of conversation. On the inside wall near the restroom, a corkboard held local notices and weather advisories. Between a flyer for a fishing tournament and a handwritten ad for firewood, a laminated card was pinned neatly at eye level. It read, "In coastal fog, do not follow lights that hold perfect distance. Do not trust repeating mile markers. Listen for the ocean. Keep it between the lines." No logo, no agency name, just advice, laminated as if it had been needed often enough to deserve protection. Caleb stared at it for a long moment, then looked away. In the cab, before pulling out, he glanced at his dash clock. 0217. The digits glowed steady green. For a second, his breath paused. Then the clock clicked forward. 0218. Caleb exhaled, slow and controlled, and eased the truck back onto the road. Hands warm, speed steady, counting what could be counted, leaving the repeating mile behind him in the fog where it belonged. Story number 4. The interstate through the river lowlands had a particular kind of night, one that never felt fully dark, because moisture held on to every light and spread it outward. Even the plainest things became soft-edged. The glow of distant factories, the red pinpricks of tower beacons, the reflective paint of lane lines that pulsed beneath a truck like a slow heartbeat. And when fog came down in that region, It didn't arrive like weather. It arrived like a change of rules. Nina Carver knew that stretch well enough to drive it almost on instinct. She'd run it for years in different seasons with different loads, paper products, canned goods, furniture wrapped in quilted pads. Tonight's cargo was simpler. Rolls of upholstery fabric stacked like enormous, sleeping cylinders in the trailer, each one tagged and banded. Nothing fragile, nothing hazardous. Just weight, texture, and the quiet scent of clean textile drifting faintly through the seams of the trailer doors. Her cab felt like its own small apartment. Dash lights dimmed to a comfortable amber, a worn hoodie hanging from a hook, an old Atlas riding under the passenger seat despite the GPS insisting it was unnecessary. A thermos sat in the cup holder, the last of her tea tasting lightly of cloves. The clock on the dash read 12:41 when the fog began to show itself in the ditches, first as pale, pooled patches, then as a higher curtain that rose steadily until her headlights could no longer find the far edge of anything. She eased down a few miles per hour, the way seasoned drivers did without thinking. Fog wasn't something to challenge. It was something to negotiate. Outside, the world narrowed to the width of her beams. Lane markers flashed and vanished. The rumble strips on the shoulder hummed a warning when she drifted too close. The air seemed thicker, as if the truck were pushing through something with body to it. The radio offered nothing but static and half-formed voices that might have been distant stations. The CB was quiet. Nina didn't mind the silence. She'd made peace with it years ago. Still, on foggy nights, silence could feel like a question asked too close to the ear. Then an overhead sign surfaced in the haze. Exit 0, Fallow Junction. The sign's reflective lettering caught her headlights and shone with peculiar clarity, crisp enough to look freshly installed. It wasn't the destination. It wasn't even familiar. Exit numbers didn't typically go to 0 out here. Nina's mind skimmed over her memory of the route. The exits had names, numbers that counted down toward the city. There was no 0. There had never been. She told herself it was a temporary designation. Construction detour signage, perhaps. A newly designated spur. The sort of thing that would show up on official maps later, after enough people had been funneled through it. But as she passed beneath the sign, another appeared on the right shoulder, smaller and closer. Exit 0, last SERVICES for 40 miles. Last services. The words were perfectly designed to hook a driver's attention. Fog made the body tight and made concentration cost more. A stop could be sensible. A quick coffee, a restroom, a chance to stretch and reset the mind. Nina glanced at her fuel gauge. Plenty. Her schedule was comfortable. The delivery window wasn't tight. Still, last services was a phrase that took on weight when the world ahead was hidden. She signaled, the turn indicator clicking softly in the cab, and eased into the exit lane. The ramp curved downward in a slow spiral, the pavement slightly darker as if it had been repaved more recently than the highway. Reflectors on short posts blinked past in orderly intervals, each one a tiny nod in the fog. At the bottom, the ramp straightened and delivered her onto a quiet 2-lane road lined with trees. Their branches vanished into gray above, while trunks stood close to the shoulder like patient sentries. A street lamp appeared, then another, casting warm halos that turned the fog into glowing parchment. Fallow Junction revealed itself not as a proper town so much as a small cluster of buildings, arranged with an almost deliberate tidiness. A diner with wide windows and amber light, a gas station with an old-fashioned canopy, a small motel with a glowing vacancy sign, and across the road, a laundromat whose fluorescent interior looked too bright against the fog's softness. There were no other moving vehicles, no headlights sliding by, no distant engine noise. Just Nina's truck rolling forward, big and careful. She pulled under the gas station canopy and stopped beside a pump. The canopy lights buzzed faintly, and the fog beyond the concrete apron thickened into a pale wall. Nina shut the engine off. The sudden quiet rang in her ears, as if the truck had been holding the world together with vibration, and now, without it, everything was free to drift. She climbed down. The air was cool and damp against her face. It smelled like wet leaves and something else, something faintly sweet like warm bread. The pump looked normal at first glance, but the display panel didn't show the usual branding or payment prompts. Instead, it showed a simple message in blocky text. "Take what you need." A small green light blinked beneath it, steady as a slow pulse. Nina stared, then glanced toward the station's office window. The blinds were half drawn. A lamp glowed inside. She expected to see a silhouette, someone moving behind the counter. No one appeared. She tried the pump anyway, more out of practicality than trust. The nozzle released with a familiar clunk. The hose was heavier than she expected, cold and slightly tacky in her gloved hand, as if it had been handled recently. She squeezed the handle. Fuel flowed. The numbers climbed smoothly, no hesitation, no error message. Everything worked. Yet the lack of price per gallon was unsettling in a quiet, civilized way, as if the pump were skipping the part of reality where things needed receipts and totals. When she finished, she returned the nozzle and stepped back, listening. Nothing changed, no door opened, no one called out. Across the road, the diner's windows glowed with the kind of warmth that didn't feel like fluorescent lighting. It felt like lamps and coffee pots and the hush of soft conversation. Nina could see movement inside, shadows shifting, a slow gesture, the brief flicker of someone turning their head. The sight loosened something in her chest. She crossed the road carefully, boots making small, damp sounds on the pavement. The diner's sign swung lightly above the door, though there was no wind. The Turnout. Beneath the name, in smaller letters. Open all night. Nina pushed the door open. A bell chimed soft, not sharp, like a spoon tapped against a ceramic mug. Warm air spilled over her, carrying the scent of coffee, toasted bread, and something peppery that reminded her of cinnamon rolls at roadside diners in her childhood. The interior was simple. Booths with worn upholstery, a counter with spinning stools, a pastry case with a few items arranged as if for display rather than sale. There were people inside. That alone should have made everything normal. But they sat with a certain stillness, as if they were listening more than speaking. A couple at a booth leaned toward one another without moving their hands. A man at the counter stared into a mug with both palms wrapped around it, shoulders slightly hunched. The room had the hush of a library, not the easy clatter of a late-night stop. A waitress appeared from behind the counter with a coffee pot in hand. Her uniform was plain, cream-colored apron, dark dress, hair pinned neatly back. She wore no name tag. Her smile was small and patient, like someone greeting a regular. "Truck out front," she said, not as a question. Nina nodded, just needed a quick stop. The waitress's eyes flicked over Nina, not in judgment, but in recognition that felt too quick to be gathered in a single glance. "Fog's doing what it does," the waitress said, and set a mug on the counter as if Nina had already ordered it. The mug was warm, not scalding. Coffee steamed gently, the surface dark and glossy. Nina slid onto a stool. The vinyl seat gave a small sigh beneath her weight. "How long has this place been here?" she asked, keeping her voice casual. "I don't remember seeing Exit 0. The waitress poured coffee into another mug for someone down the counter, then returned her attention. "Fallow Junction shows up when the road needs it," she said, echoing the kind of phrase that belonged in folklore rather than logistics. "Drivers pass by plenty. Sometimes they don't see." Nina took a sip of coffee. It tasted unusually good, rich, smooth, like someone had actually cared about making it instead of leaving it to burn on a hot plate. Warmth traveled through her chest in a slow, relieving wave. She glanced around again. The people in the diner did not look strange. They looked tired, like travelers, Their clothes were ordinary. Their faces carried the mild slackness of long hours. But there was something in their eyes, in the way they held their cups, that suggested they were all holding onto the same thought and refusing to name it. A small jukebox sat near the wall, its lights subdued. It wasn't playing. The silence seemed to keep it in place, like a decorative object. Nina's gaze landed on a bulletin board near the restroom door. Flyers were pinned neatly in rows as if someone had taken time to align them. Most were simple: lost dog, yard sale, church supper. One in the center caught her attention. A plain card laminated. If you found exit in fog, don't rush. Don't doubt your eyes. Drink something warm. Go back the way you came. Nina felt a slow chill creep up her arms. Not sharp, not panicked, more like the realization of stepping into a room where a conversation has already been happening about her. She turned back toward the counter. So, you're saying I should go back? The waitress nodded gently. After you settle. Nina's hand tightened around the mug. The ceramic was solid, grounding. Why? Nina asked. The waitress looked past Nina's shoulder, toward the diner windows where fog pressed against the glass like a curious animal. Because if you keep driving in it the way you were, she said softly, you'll start thinking you're alone, and that's when the road gets persuasive. Persuasive, Nina repeated. The waitress's smile faded into something more neutral, more careful. Signs repeat, she said. Lights offer to guide you. Exits look helpful. Some are, some aren't. But this one, she tapped the counter once, a small, tidy gesture, is a place to make your mind quiet again. A faint sound threaded through the diner, the bell over the door chiming. Nina turned. Someone had entered. Or rather, something had changed at the doorway. The fog thickened there, and a silhouette stood just inside, paused as if deciding whether to become a person in full. The shape resolved into a man in a dark jacket, cap pulled low. He moved with slow certainty, like someone conserving energy. He sat at the end of the counter, not looking around, not acknowledging anyone. The waitress placed a mug in front of him without being asked. He wrapped his hands around it, as if the warmth mattered more than the drink. Nina watched his reflection in the polished surface of the counter. His face wasn't clear in it, only the suggestion of features. The man spoke without lifting his head. Exit 0 again, he murmured. The words were quiet, but the entire diner seemed to absorb them. Nina's shoulders tightened, again implied a history, a pattern. The waitress spoke to him in the same calm tone. You found it, that's enough. The man's fingers flexed around his mug. Thought I was past it, he said, and let out a breath that sounded like a laugh only in its shape. Thought if I kept driving, I'd outrun the loop. The loop. Nina's mind flashed back to the highway above, the fog, the narrow distance, the overhead sign appearing too crisp. She pictured herself continuing on, mile markers repeating, the same exit signs reappearing like polite invitations. She imagined the fatigue that would creep in, not sleepiness exactly, but doubt. The feeling that the road was not a line but a circle, that forward progress was an illusion. The waitress set a small plate beside Nina's mug. 2 pieces of toast, butter melting slowly, the scent of warm bread rising like comfort. I didn't order, Nina began. Take what you need, the waitress said, echoing the pump outside, the words carrying a steadiness that made them feel like a rule of the place. Nina ate a bite. The toast was real. The butter was real. The simple act grounded her more than any rational explanation. A subtle sound began near the jukebox, soft at first, like the whisper of a motor warming up. Then the jukebox lights brightened, and it started to play. Not a loud song. Something gentle and old, a melody that moved in slow circles. The kind of tune people hummed absent-mindedly while doing dishes or folding laundry. It carried no sharp edges, only repetition and warmth. Nina didn't recognize the song, but her body responded to it anyway. Her breathing slowed. Her hands loosened around the mug. The diner's quiet changed texture. It felt less like suspense and more like rest. The man at the end of the counter lifted his head slightly, listening. His expression softened, as if he'd been waiting for that song without knowing it. Nina looked at the waitress. "What is this place?" The waitress's eyes were kind but careful, like someone dealing with something that could be frightened if named too directly. "It's a turnout," she said simply, gesturing toward the sign outside as if the literal meaning should be enough. "Some nights the road offers you a shoulder wide enough to breathe." "And the cost?" Nina asked before she could stop herself. The waitress smiled again, small, patient. "The cost is that you don't try to keep it," she said. "You don't take pieces. You don't insist on proof. You let it do its job and then you go." Nina felt the urge, sudden and irrational, to look for a receipt, to photograph the laminated sign, to check her phone for a signal, to hold on to something concrete. But the waitress's calm made that urge feel childish, like clutching a dream too hard and waking up with nothing but clenched fists. Nina finished her coffee. She ate the toast slowly, listening to the jukebox's gentle loop. The diner remained quiet. The travelers remained present without demanding anything from her. It felt, in an odd way, like sitting among people who all understood the same unspoken rule. No one would be asked to explain what brought them here. When Nina finally stood, the waitress had already moved to the register. "Safe road," she said, and slid something across the counter. It wasn't a bill. It was a small card, thick like a loyalty card, matte black with simple white lettering. "Exit 0, Fallow Junction. Go back the way you came." There was no logo, no phone number, no address. Nina held it between her fingers. The card was warm, as if it had been kept near a coffee pot. "I can't," Nina began. "Don't keep it," the waitress said gently, as if reading Nina's mind. "Use it." Nina frowned. "Use it how?" The waitress's gaze shifted to Nina's jacket sleeve, where a seam near the cuff had begun to fray, something Nina had noticed earlier in the week and ignored. "Not everything needs fixing on the road," the waitress said, voice soft. "But some things do, so you don't unravel." Nina looked down at her sleeve, then back up, confusion mixing with a creeping sense of being seen too clearly. She slipped the card into her pocket anyway, not out of greed, but because refusing it felt like refusing a seatbelt offered before a storm. Outside, the fog pressed close, the town lights turning it golden. Nina crossed back to her truck, climbed into the cab, and started the engine. The diesel rumble returned like a deep reassurance. In her mirrors, Fallow Junction looked like a small, warm thought hovering in gray. She pulled out, followed the road back up the ramp, and merged onto the highway. Fog swallowed the ramp behind her. For a mile, nothing changed. The world remained a narrow corridor of light. The lane lines pulsed beneath her. The shoulder hummed when she drifted too close. Nina's mind waited for the trick, for the mile marker to repeat, for the same overhead sign to appear again. Instead, the highway sign that emerged ahead read something she recognized, a normal exit with a normal number. The reflective letters were scuffed the way real signs got scuffed. The world had texture again. Her shoulders loosened slowly, like a knot being untied one careful loop at a time. She drove on, steady and quiet, letting the fog be weather rather than architecture. An hour later, when she stopped at a brightly branded chain travel plaza, blazing lights, multiple trucks parked in orderly rows, the familiar smell of diesel and fast food, everything felt loudly ordinary. Her phone had signal. The store's TVs played a sports highlight reel. Someone laughed near the coffee machines. Nina stood near her truck with a paper cup of water and tried to decide what had happened. The mind wanted to categorize it: hallucination, misread signage, fatigue. but her body remembered the warmth of the diner coffee too vividly to file it away as nothing. Back in her cab, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the black card. It wasn't there. Instead, her fingers found something else, a small spool of thread wrapped neatly in paper. The thread was a deep charcoal color, almost black, the kind used to mend workwear. A sewing needle was tucked into the paper wrap with careful precision. On the paper, in the same clean block lettering, a message was printed. "Keep yourself together." Nina stared at it for a long moment. The cab's heater breathed warm air over her hands. The dash lights glowed steady. Outside, the fog drifted through the lot lights like slow smoke. She took her jacket sleeve, found the frayed seam, and sitting in the quiet safety of her parked truck, made a few careful stitches. The thread moved smoothly. The needle slid through fabric with a soft resistance. Each pull tightened the seam, closing a small gap she hadn't realized bothered her until it was gone. When she finished, she tied the knot and clipped the thread with a tiny pair of scissors from her glove compartment. The seam looked better, stronger. A mundane thing fixed. But Nina's hands felt steadier afterward, as if the act had stitched something in her mind as well. She placed the spool in the console not as evidence but as a tool, something practical, something quiet. Then she pulled back onto the highway and continued her run, letting the fog come and go without taking her sense of direction with it. Somewhere out there, Exit Zero might appear again, warm, patient, unadvertised, offering a cup of coffee and a place to breathe. But it didn't feel like a trap. It felt like the road's way of making sure a driver didn't unravel in the wrong kind of silence. Story number 5. The back hall was supposed to feel like relief. After the delivery, after the paperwork, after the last tight turn into the receiver's yard where floodlights made everything look flat and pale, an empty trailer usually meant a lighter steering wheel and a quieter mind. The rig moved easier without the stubborn weight of freight, and the road felt less like a responsibility and more like a long exhale. But emptiness could be its own kind of cargo. Drew Halden rolled out of the distribution yard just after the shift change, when tired workers shuffled toward their cars and forklifts were finally stilled. The guard shack window glowed with a small lamp, warm and ordinary. A pen scratched across a logbook somewhere inside. Drew's trailer doors were sealed, though the trailer was empty. It wasn't unusual. Some yards insisted on it, policy, habit, a preference for control. The metal seal tag hung from the latch like a small piece of punctuation, bright against dull steel. The night outside the yard had that damp, soft quality that hinted at fog before it fully arrived. Streetlights wore halos. The air smelled of wet asphalt and cold river wind, like the nearby water was breathing quietly in the dark. Drew merged onto the state highway and settled into a steady pace. His cab was a lived-in space of small comforts, heater pushing gentle warmth at his knees, dash lights dimmed to a copper glow, a thermos in the cup holder that smelled faintly of chamomile. A folded blanket lay on the passenger seat, its edge tucked under an atlas that was older than his GPS and twice as trustworthy, at least in his mind. The trailer behind him made the familiar light rattles of an empty box, subtle. Shivers of metal against metal when the road seems changed. Nothing alarming, just the quiet language of a rig with no freight to keep it still. He drove through a corridor of trees and low marshland where the road ran nearly level with the river. The landscape here didn't rise much. It spread. It held moisture the way cloth held scent. And then a few miles in, the fog arrived for real. It slid in from the low ground and climbed the shoulders first, filling the ditches until they looked like pale lakes. Drew watched it in the headlight spill, a slow, deliberate whitening of the world. Within minutes, the horizon shrank to a short tunnel, and anything beyond his beams became rumor. He eased off the throttle, letting the truck's speed fall without drama. The tires hissed softly. The lane lines flashed beneath him, white, then gone, then white again, like the road was blinking. Up ahead, the taillights of another vehicle appeared, two red points hovering in the fog, steady and calm. Company, Drew's mind supplied, and his shoulders loosened by a fraction. He kept his distance, let the other vehicle set the pace. Fog driving was a discipline of patience more than skill. The taillights held perfectly steady, no braking, no swaying with the gentle bends. The vehicle remained just far enough ahead to be useful, not close enough to feel like pressure. Drew watched them for a while, then returned his attention to the lane markers and the right shoulder line, anchoring himself to the few things fog didn't steal immediately. A reflective sign emerged on the right. Watch for sudden dense fog. It would have been funny if it weren't so accurate. The fog thickened, and Drew's headlights turned it into a bright, moving wall. The red taillights ahead dimmed, then brightened, then dimmed again as if the fog was breathing between them. And then Drew heard it. A knock. Not loud, not a bang. A polite sound muffled by distance and metal, 3 small taps that seemed to come from behind him. His first thought was road debris, a pebble kicked up, a small chunk of ice, something harmless striking the underside of the trailer. But the sound had rhythm. 3 taps evenly spaced, like someone checking a door. Drew's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. His eyes flicked to the right mirror, then the left. The trailer's reflective tape shone back at him in pale strips. The fog turned everything into soft-edged shapes. Another set of taps came again, 3. The empty trailer rattled faintly, as empty trailers did, but this was different. This was deliberate. Drew told himself not to spiral. The mind liked to invent patterns in the fog. It liked to assign intention to random sounds. He adjusted the radio volume up a notch. The static gave him something to lean on. For a minute, the tap stopped. The taillights ahead continued, steady as a slow metronome. Drew exhaled and kept going, eyes scanning, shoulders trying to stay down. Then the CB crackled. A voice came through, thin with static, the words breaking apart at the edges. Northbound, you got your back door. Drew's gaze snapped to the trailer in the mirror. Back door. The voice continued, clearer now, as if the fog had opened a small channel just for the message. You got your back door knockin'. Drew stared at the CB unit like it might have grown teeth. Nobody used the CB much anymore on this route, and if someone was calling him, they'd usually lead with a handle, a mile marker, something concrete. He lifted the mic anyway, thumb hovering. Before he could speak, another voice layered over the first, faint and almost soft. Drew. His name. Not shouted, not urgent, just spoken like someone trying it out, testing whether it still fit in the air. Drew did not answer. His thumb remained hovering, and the cab felt suddenly smaller, more enclosed, as if the fog outside had pressed inward through every scene. He glanced to his dash clock. 01:11. The digits glowed steady. Outside, the taillights ahead blinked once, right turn signal, and drifted toward an exit ramp that appeared out of nowhere in the gray. The reflective sign at the ramp's mouth read, RIVERLINE Service Road. Drew didn't remember any service road here, but he also didn't remember ever hearing a voice on the CB say his name in that careful tone. The truck's empty trailer gave a soft shudder. 3 taps. Drew's throat went dry. He swallowed and signaled, not because he had decided, but because his body was buying time. His turn indicator clicked in the cab like a small, insistent clock. The taillights ahead took the ramp. Drew followed. The ramp curved downward and the fog thickened, turning the world into a soft, glowing corridor. Reflective posts lined the curve at perfect intervals, each one flaring white for a heartbeat as his headlights caught it. At the bottom, The service road straightened into a narrow two-lane strip bordered by wetlands. The fog here carried a stronger scent of water and decaying leaves, earthy and cold. The taillights ahead stayed just far enough away to be useful. Still no visible vehicle body, only red dots in gray. Drew's trailer rattled lightly, the empty metal box responding to the road texture. 3 taps. This time he felt them in his spine. He tried to reason it out. Air pressure shift, loose latch, resonance in the doors, something small caught in the hinge. Yet the sealed tag still hung there. He could see it when his mirrors caught the right angle, a bright sliver of plastic against metal. The service road ran straight for nearly a mile, then approached a gate. A real gate, chain link stretched between metal posts, a keypad box, a small guard booth with a single lamp glowing inside. The whole scene looked too composed, too carefully lit, like a stage set built from industrial memory. The taillights ahead stopped before the gate. They hovered there steady. Drew slowed and stopped a safe distance behind. He sat in the cab, engine idling, the diesel rumble vibrating through the floor. The fog drifted in slow sheets, swallowing the edges of the booth and gate. In the guard booth window, a silhouette shifted. A person stepped out, average height, bundled in a dark jacket with reflective strips at the cuffs. They moved unhurriedly, like the night belonged to them. They approached Drew's driver's side window. Drew lowered it a few inches. Cold, damp air slid in, carrying the scent of river water. The guard looked up at him. The face was calm, neutral, neither friendly nor unfriendly. The eyes seemed pale in the booth's amber light, like they reflected more than they absorbed. "Even in," the guard said, and the word "even in" felt like it had been used here 1,000 times. Drew nodded once, didn't know this road was open. "It opens," the guard replied, as if that explained everything. Drew glanced ahead. The taillights, those red points, were still there, waiting. "There was a car," Drew began. The guard's gaze went past him, toward the fog behind the trailer. "Empty trailer?" the guard asked. "Yes," Drew said, though his voice sounded less certain than it should have. The guard nodded, like that fit the shape of the situation. "Sometimes empties pick up noise," the guard said gently. "River fog does that, makes sound travel strange." Drew tried to laugh, but it came out as a breath. "It's knockin'." The guard didn't look surprised. "Don't open it," the guard said. Drew's stomach tightened. "I wasn't planning to." The guard leaned slightly closer, voice lowering, not conspiratorial, just careful. "If you're hearing taps," they said, "keep driving. Don't check it in the fog. Don't stand behind the doors." Drew's fingers tightened on the window edge. "Why?" The guard's eyes flicked to Drew's side mirror, where the trailer's reflective tape glowed faintly. "Because fog makes people curious," the guard said. "Curiosity is fine in daylight. Out here it turns into a habit." Drew swallowed. The advice was sensible, almost ordinary, and that made it worse. It sounded like something learned through repetition. The guard turned toward the keypad and pressed a sequence without looking at their hands. The gate clicked and began to swing inward with a slow, steady motion. Drew glanced ahead again. The taillights were gone. Not fading, not moving away, simply absent, as if someone had turned off a pair of bulbs and left nothing behind. His skin prickled along his forearms. The guard stepped back, gesturing calmly. "Go through. Stay on Riverline until you hit the merge. Don't stop." Drew nodded, put the truck in gear, and rolled forward through the gate. As he passed the booth, the guard's voice came softly through the open window. "And Drew," the guard said. Drew's heart gave a hard, single thump. He glanced over. The guard's expression remained calm, almost kind. "Keep your mirrors set where they belong," the guard said. "Not too high, not too low." Drew didn't ask what that meant. He didn't trust his own voice to come out steady. He drove on. The service road narrowed and ran alongside the river. Somewhere beyond the fog, water moved. He could hear it faintly now, a slow hush against reeds and mud. The sound made the world feel more real, more measurable. His mirrors showed what they always showed. The sides of the trailer, reflective tape in pale strips, fog behind him lit by the trailer's marker lights. He adjusted the mirrors slightly, just as the guard had said, making sure he could see the trailer's corners properly. It was a small ritual, familiar and grounding. For a few miles, the tapping stopped. Drew's shoulders began to ease. The heater breathed warm air over his hands. The engine note stayed steady. Then the CB crackled again. This time the voice was clearer, still wrapped in static, but distinct enough to be understood. "Driver northbound on Riverline," it said. "You're carrying a return." Drew stared at the road ahead, jaw tight. "A return?" He didn't answer. The voice continued, calm and patient. "Unclaimed," it said. "You don't have to keep it, just take it where it goes." A soft, polite sound came from behind him. 3 taps. Drew's throat went tight. He focused on what he could count. The right shoulder reflectors flaring one by one, the faint rise and fall of the road, the steady hum of tires. He did not stop. The fog thickened again, then thinned, then thickened, breathing around him as if the road itself had lungs. At last, a sign emerged ahead, reflective and scuffed like a normal sign that had lived through real weather. "Merge State HWI 9. Relief moved through Drew's body like warm water. He merged carefully, staying between the lines, letting the wider highway feel like a return to ordinary rules. The fog remained, but it felt less intentional out here, less like a corridor with purpose, more like weather doing what weather did. The CB went quiet. The tapping stopped. Drew drove another 20 minutes before he allowed himself to take the next exit into a brightly lit travel plaza. The lot was busy enough to be comforting. A few trucks parked in a neat row, cars near the fuel canopy, a glowing convenience store with harsh fluorescent certainty. The fog here was thinner, broken up by heat and light. Drew parked, set the brake, and sat for a moment with both hands resting on the wheel. The cab smelled like warm plastic and chamomile tea. The dash clock glowed. 01:58. He exhaled slowly and forced himself to do the practical thing, a walk-around inspection. Outside, the air was cool and damp. The pavement shone. Somewhere nearby, an air compressor kicked on with a low groan. A driver laughed softly by the coffee machines inside, the sound muffled through glass. Drew walked along the trailer's side, checking tires by sight, then with a gentle kick. Everything looked normal. When he reached the rear doors, he stopped. The seal tag was still there, bright and intact. But the reflective tape on the doors, 2 horizontal strips, looked different. Or rather, it looked like it had been joined by something else. In the beam of the lot light, faint reflective marks had appeared across the door panels, not like graffiti, not like paint, more like the ghost of tape, a residue that caught light at just the right angle. Drew stepped to the side and looked again, letting the lamp hit it differently. The marks aligned into letters. A single word, large enough to read from a few feet away. Found. Drew's breath caught, then steadied. He didn't feel terror. He felt the quiet, prickling sense of being addressed by something that didn't use mouths. He raised a hand and touched the door panel beneath the letters. The metal was cold, ordinary, solid. The letters did not feel raised. They weren't carved or painted. They only existed when light struck them, as if they were made of reflection itself. From inside the travel plaza, a door opened and shut. Someone's footsteps crossed the lot. The world remained normal around this one, impossible detail. Drew looked at the seal again. Intact. He did not open the doors. He stood there for a long moment, fog curling around his boots, and listened. No tapping now. Just the distant hum of engines, the hiss of tires on wet pavement, the small, steady sounds of a place built for travelers. Back in the cab, Drew sat with his hands warm on the steering wheel and stared at his dispatch paperwork on the passenger seat. It listed the delivery, it listed the pickup, it listed the return route. Nothing about a return. Nothing about Riverline. Nothing about exit 0 roads and guard booths and voices that knew his name. Yet when he flipped the page, a small tag fell out that he didn't remember having. A thin plastic tag like a seal tag but blank, no barcode, no number. Except for one thing, a call sign written in neat block letters, as if printed by a label maker. Arrivederci, lost and found. Drew held it between his fingers. It was light. It felt cheap and real. He didn't know what to do with it, and that uncertainty sat in his chest like a held breath. Then slowly, a thought arrived, not from the CB, not from the fog, but from the simplest place in him. The part that had learned over thousands of miles that not everything on the road needed to be understood to be handled correctly. Some things only needed to be carried properly. Drew placed the tag in the console, not as proof, not as a trophy. As a reminder. He started the engine, let the cab fill with its steady rumble, and eased back onto the highway. Fog still drifted in the low places. Lights still wore halos. The world still softened at the edges. But the road ahead was marked. The lines were visible. The mirrors were set where they belonged. And behind him, the empty trailer rode quietly, as if whatever it had picked up had finally decided it was being taken. Somewhere it could rest. Story number 6. The Northern Turnpike had a way of making even confident drivers feel small. Not because it was steep or complicated, most of it was wide, well-maintained, and obediently marked, but because the landscape around it refused to participate. Forest pressed close to the shoulders. Hills rose and fell without offering landmarks. In certain weather, the sky came down so low it seemed to skim the tops of the pines, and the road became the only idea that mattered. That night the fog didn't drift in. It settled, as if the world had decided to keep its secrets close. Elliot Vance drove an overnight run with a trailer full of palletized boxed goods, lightweight, strapped tight, nothing that shifted. The cab held the usual comforts: warm air from the heater, the faint scent of detergent from a clean hoodie draped over the passenger seat, the soft glow of gauges like a small constellation. He kept his speed modest. Fog demanded humility, and he gave it without argument. The tires whispered over damp pavement. Reflectors blinked past at the margins in steady intervals, each one a small reassurance that the road still agreed with itself. The radio offered a song that came and went behind static. The station ID never quite formed. It was the kind of sound a driver kept on not to listen exactly, but to prevent the cab from becoming a sealed jar of silence. Then, around a long, gentle bend where the forest seemed to lean in, a sign emerged out of the gray. Quiet, mild, no horn, no radio. The letters were reflective, sharp, and oddly formal. Not a standard highway warning. Not an advisory Elliot remembered seeing before. The sort of sign that should have been accompanied by a state logo or a construction notice or anything that explained why it existed. But it stood alone, posted at shoulder height like a personal request. Elliot frowned and eased off the radio's volume. His hand hovered a moment over the knob, then turned it down further until the static became a barely there hiss. It wasn't that he believed the sign had authority. It was that fog made even silly instructions feel like they had consequences. The next half mile offered nothing but gray and pine silhouettes. The lane lines remained visible, but distance shortened in a way that made the world feel pressed against the windshield. Elliot's breath warmed the air inside the cab, and the heater kept his hands comfortable. He rolled past another sign. Quiet Mile BGNS. As his headlights washed over it, something changed. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that screamed danger. Something simply shifted into place. Sound thinned. The engine still rumbled beneath him, steady and real. The fan still whispered. The subtle rattle of the dash still existed. Those were inside sounds, belonging to the little moving room of the cab. But the outside sound, wind noise, the faint hiss of tires against wet pavement, the distant suggestion of other vehicles, seemed to fade as if someone had closed a heavy door. Elliot blinked, then checked his window seal instinctively, as if he might have accidentally shut out the world. The fog remained unchanged. The road remained the road. Only the atmosphere felt muted. In the mirror, the trailer's red marker lights glowed softly, steady as embers. Beyond them, the fog was a blank page. Elliot kept driving. A minute later, the forest on the right opened into a wide gravel pull-off, the kind used by maintenance crews. A single lamp on a tall pole cast a warm circle of light that turned the fog into pale gold. Under that lamp sat a truck. Not moving, not idling, dark except for a dim amber cab light like a bedside lamp in a sleeping house. Elliot's eyes narrowed. The truck was parked perfectly straight, centered in the pull-off as if placed there for an inspection photo. No hazard flashers, no reflective triangles, no sign of the driver. He passed it, and the lamp's glow slipped away behind him. Another pull-off appeared ahead, also lit. Another truck sat beneath it. Then another. 3 in a row, each one dark and still, each one with that same faint cab light glowing, warm and domestic against the fog. Elliot felt a slow tightening at the base of his throat. Not panic, not yet. More like the sensation of walking through a neighborhood where every house has a porch light on and no one is outside. The road remained empty otherwise. No oncoming headlights, no taillights ahead. Just these parked rigs in their separate pools of light, each one a small island of quiet. Elliot glanced at his dash clock, then away again. Time didn't feel trustworthy here. The quiet had made the miles feel strained, both longer and shorter, like a dream trying to decide how much space it needed. He reached for the CB mic out of habit, thumb hovering over the button. The sign returned to him, no radio. He set the mic back gently. The road bent slightly left, reflectors blinked by, the forest closed in again. Then Elliot saw a shape ahead that didn't fit the pattern of trees and fog. A message board, the kind used for road work and alerts, stood on the right shoulder. Its amber LEDs glowed through the gray. The text scrolled slowly enough to read. Driver, keep both hands on the wheel. Do not speak aloud in the quiet mile. Elliot's fingers tightened on the wheel in spite of the instruction, then loosened as he forced them to. Driver, not motorists, not commercial vehicles. Driver, like the sign had been waiting for him specifically. He didn't speak. His mouth felt suddenly too dry anyway, as if words would scrape on the way out. The message board changed. If you hear your name, do not answer. Elliot's breath became very measured. He stared through the windshield, focusing on the lane lines, on the right shoulder, on the small, reliable geometry of the highway. The message board faded into fog behind him. The quiet outside the cab thickened further, becoming so complete that it felt like pressure against the glass. Even the movement of the wipers sounded wrong, too loud inside, too absent outside, as if the windshield were scraping against nothing at all. And then through that manufactured hush, something arrived. A knock. 3 soft taps. Not from the trailer, not from the road. From the passenger side window. Elliot's head turned a fraction, but his eyes didn't fully commit. He kept his gaze mostly forward, using peripheral vision. The passenger window showed only fog, pale and blank, with the faint suggestion of the side mirror's shape. 3 taps again. Polite, even, like someone asking to be led into a conversation. Elliot's mind tried to supply an explanation. A branch, a pebble, wind-driven debris. But the outside air didn't sound like wind. It sounded like nothing. He held the wheel, steady and warm beneath his palms, and kept driving. A third set of taps came, slightly slower. Then a sound threaded into the cab, not through the speakers, not through the CB, not through any device. A sound that seemed to arrive by way of the quiet itself. Elliot. It was faint, as if spoken from several feet away, and yet it carried the intimacy of a voice spoken close to the ear. The syllables were careful, not threatening, not friendly either. Simply confident. Elliot did not answer. The message board's warning repeated itself in his mind with surprising clarity, as if it had been written on the inside of his eyelids. If you hear your name, do not answer. He swallowed, kept his shoulders down, and focused on the simple physics of driving. Lane discipline, speed control, following distance from the nothingness ahead. Another truck appeared under a lamp in a pull-off to the right. This one was different. Its headlights were on, low beams, aimed across the gravel and into the fog, illuminating an empty space like a stage awaiting actors. Elliot passed it, and as he did, his peripheral vision caught movement in its cab, a silhouette shifting, as if someone had leaned forward to look out. No face, no gesture. Just attention. The highway straightened. Ahead through the fog, a pair of taillights appeared. 2 red dots at passenger car height, perfectly even, perfectly steady. Elliot's first thought was relief again, company packing something to follow. But the quiet mile had already taught him that steadiness could be a trick, perfect distance could be bait, lights could be offered like a hand extended in fog. The taillights remained far ahead, neither closer nor farther, as if pinned to a specific point in Elliot's perception. The quiet made them feel louder than they were, as if the eyes could hear them. Elliot kept his distance and refused to gain on them. The taillights blinked once, left turn signal, though the road did not turn left. They blinked again, right, though no exit appeared. Then they stopped blinking and returned to their steady glow. A new sign emerged on the right shoulder, reflective and plain. Quiet yard, trucks only, 1-2 mile. The taillights ahead blinked right again, this time holding the signal as if insisting. Elliot's mouth went dry. He didn't want to exit into some unmarked place in the fog. But he also understood something that drivers learned in their bones. Sometimes the safest choice was the one that reduced variables. A controlled environment, a place with light, a place to stop without inventing a shoulder out of nothing. The sign offered a name, Quiet Yard. A place made for the condition he was in. Elliot signaled right and took the exit. The ramp curved gently downward. Reflective posts flashed by with meticulous regularity. The fog thickened, but the lighting grew warmer, as if the place ahead held its own weather. At the bottom of the ramp, a gate stood open. Not broken, not forced, simply open as if expecting him. A second message board glowed near the entrance, amber LED steady. Welcome, driver. No ideal ing. No radio. Park, then wait. Elliot rolled forward slowly into a wide lot lined with tall lamps. The lamps cast warm circles that overlapped, turning the fog into layers of gold and cream. The entire yard felt curated. Clean pavement, bright stripping, no litter, no random cones. Just spaces, light, and the hush of rules. Trucks were parked all along the edges, dozens of them dark, still, each with a dim cab light glowing. The scene resembled a campground at night, except the tents were rigs and the firelight was electric. Elliot chose a spot near the center, away from other trailers, and parked with care. He set the brake. He shut off the engine. The The moment the rumble died, the cab seemed to swell with silence. The heater stopped pushing air. The gauges continued glowing, but the truck became a still object rather than a moving one. Outside, the quiet miles hush pressed against the glass. Elliot sat with both hands on the wheel, listening. In the lot, there were no idling engines, no doors opening, no voices, no footsteps, just the faint electrical buzz of lamps and the soft, slow movement of fog. Then, very gently, someone knocked on his driver's side door. One knock, pause, one knock. Not the 3 taps from before. This was different, patient and human in its rhythm. Elliot's eyes flicked to the side mirror. A figure stood just outside the driver's door, barely visible through the fog and lamp glow. The figure wore a reflective raincoat, the kind maintenance crews used. The reflective strips caught the lamplight in clean bands. A hood was up, framing a face that remained shadowed. Elliot did not open the door right away. His hand moved to the window switch instead, lowering the glass a few inches. Cold, damp air slid in like water. The figure spoke softly, and the voice arrived without distortion, without static. "Welcome," they said. "You made it into the yard." The tone was calm, almost gentle, like someone speaking in a quiet hospital corridor. Elliot nodded once. His voice felt risky, but he chose a few words anyway, carefully controlled. "What is this place?" he asked. The figure's posture didn't shift. The hood remained angled toward him. "A rest for your senses," they said, "not for your clock." Elliot's throat tightened at the phrasing. He glanced around the yard again. So many trucks, all still, all lit from within like sleeping rooms. "Why no radio?" he asked. The figure lifted one gloved hand and tapped the side of their own hood, as if indicating ears. "Because the quiet is doing a job," they said. "Sound calls things. Words invite answers." Elliot's skin prickled. "I heard my name," he admitted. The figure nodded as if that was expected, as if it happened often enough to be routine. "And you didn't answer," they said. It wasn't praise, it was confirmation. Elliot swallowed. What happens if someone answers? The figure's gloved hand lifted, palm down, making a calming gesture, steady, slow, reassuring. "Then the road learns your voice," they said, "and it starts using it." Elliot stared at them. The fog turned the reflective strips on the raincoat into bright parentheses around their body. He didn't like the idea of the road learning anything about him. Roads were supposed to be indifferent, concrete and paint, a place you traveled through, not something that noticed you back. The figure reached into a pocket and produced a small paper packet, the sort that might hold antiseptic wipes or sugar for coffee. They held it up to the narrow opening of the window. Elliot hesitated, then took it. The packet was worn, as if it had been kept near a heater. It had simple black text printed on it. ERPLUGS. For the quiet mile. Do not sleep, just rest. Elliot looked up, but the figure had already stepped back slightly, giving him space as if space mattered here. Across the lot, another truck's cab light brightened for a moment, then dimmed. A silhouette shifted behind a windshield. Elliot realized with a slow, creeping clarity that many of the drivers were awake, not sleeping, just sitting, resting without surrendering. Waiting. Elliot turned the packet over in his hands. The earplugs inside were the soft foam kind, pale yellow, practical, ordinary. "How long?" he asked, and his voice sounded too loud in the small cab. The figure's head tilted slightly. "Until your mind stops chasing," they said. "Until you can hear what belongs to your truck again and not what belongs to the fog." Elliot's gaze dropped to the steering wheel beneath his hands. Leather texture, familiar wear, warmth. He thought about the 3 taps on the passenger window, the voice saying his name, the taillights that held perfect distance like a lure. He opened the packet and rolled the earplugs between his fingers. Then carefully, he inserted them. The effect wasn't dramatic at first. The cab didn't become silent. His own breathing remained, and his heartbeat, and the faint tick of cooling metal, but something did shift. The outside hush stopped feeling like pressure. It became simply absence. Elliot's shoulders lowered. His jaw unclenched slightly. The fog outside the windshield continued moving in slow sheets under the lamps, but it looked less like a living thing and more like weather again, just moisture and light. He sat like that, hands relaxed, eyes half-lidded but open, not sleeping, resting. Minutes passed in a way that didn't demand counting. At some point, a soft chime sounded in the yard, not from a speaker, but from the lamps themselves, a tiny change in their electrical hum that felt like a signal rather than a sound. The figure in the raincoat returned to the window and lifted a hand, palm up, inviting the earplugs back. Elliot removed them and placed them in the packet. When he handed the packet out, his fingers brushed the figure's glove. The glove felt dry, not damp, warm, not cold. "Can I keep them?" Elliot asked quietly, a small human impulse to hold on to what had helped. The figure shook their head once. "Not yours," they said, "not meant to travel." Elliot watched them step away, their reflective strips fading into fog. A message board at the yard's exit lit up, amber letters scrolling slowly. "Quiet mile ending. Start engine. Keep radio off for 1 mile. Do not look for the lights." Elliot stared at the last line. "Do not look for the lights." It felt less like a warning about safety and more like a warning about temptation. He started the engine. The familiar rumble returned, grounding and warm. The heater resumed its gentle breath. The gauges glowed steady. He signaled and rolled toward the exit, passing rows of parked trucks. Inside some cabs, silhouettes sat still under dim cab lights. In others, the lights were off entirely, but the trucks looked no less present, like sleeping animals. At the gate, the fog thinned just enough to show the ramp leading back to the highway. Elliot merged carefully. The moment he crossed back onto the turnpike, the outside sound returned, not fully, not immediately, but in layers. First the faint hiss of tires, then the whisper of wind around the mirrors. Then, far away, a sound like another vehicle moving somewhere beyond visibility. Weather again, road again. Elliot kept the radio off, just as instructed. The cab felt clearer without it, as if the quiet had rinsed something out. He drove 1 mile, then another. A final sign appeared on the right shoulder, scuffed like a real highway sign that had survived ordinary seasons. "Quiet mile ends." Elliot exhaled slowly, realizing he'd been holding his breath in small, unconscious pieces. He reached for the radio knob and turned it up. A normal station snapped in, an ordinary song, a commercial, a traffic update delivered in a bored voice. The mundanity was almost luxurious. Elliot glanced into his side mirror, unable to stop himself from checking. The fog behind him looked like fog, nothing more. No floating taillights. No perfect distance. No suggestion of a listening presence. He drove on through thinning gray until the forest began to show edges again. Pine trunks became distinct. The shoulder's gravel texture returned. The world resumed its usual messy honesty. Later, at a brightly lit travel plaza, Elliot parked among other rigs and went inside for coffee. The store smelled like fried food and cleaning solution. Someone argued gently over a lottery ticket at the counter. A cooler door thumped shut. In the restroom hallway, a safety bulletin board held weather advisories and chain laws. Elliot scanned it out of habit. A laminated card sat among the notices, so plain it might have been ignored by anyone not looking for it. In dense fog, if you enter the quiet mile, keep your words to yourself. If you hear your name, do not answer. If you find the quiet yard, rest without sleep. Leave what you're given. At the bottom, in smaller print, Some ROADS echo. Some ROADS listen. Elliot stared at it for a long moment, coffee warming his hands, the bright, ordinary noise of the plaza surrounding him like a shield. Back in his cab before pulling out, he checked the passenger seat. A small paper packet lay there. ERPLUGS. For the quiet mile. Elliot's throat tightened. He knew he was sure he had handed them back. He picked up the packet and turned it over. On the back, in neat black letters, a final line had been added. Not for keeping. For REMMBRING. Elliot didn't open the packet. He placed it in the glove compartment, behind his insurance papers and spare fuses, among the practical things that kept a truck honest. Not as proof, not as a story to tell on the radio. As a reminder that on certain fog nights, the road could become attentive. And that sometimes, the safest thing a driver could do was not to conquer the strange, but to move through it with patience. Hands warm, speed steady, words held gently inside until the world stopped listening.